He used to smuggle drugs. Then he got caught and he became one of the government's most valuable informants in the war against cocaine. But last night in Louisiana, Barry Seal's enemies caught up with him and killed him.
February 19th, 1986. He had helped take down Pablo Escobar. Now he's parked outside the halfway house where he served his sentence. Unarmed, exposed, and seconds away from death because the Medellin cartel had found him. This is what happens to cartel snitches in prison.
A mí lo que más me presionó a entregarme es porque quiero arreglar mi problema judicial que tengan las autoridades en este país.
November 6th, 1998. A man walks into a Colombian prison posing as a lawyer. He makes his way to the soccer field, where a group of inmates are playing under the warm Palmyra sun. One of them was Helmer Herrera, a former kingpin of the Cali cartel. The so-called lawyer greets him with a hug, and then, without warning, pulls out a 9mm pistol and fires 7 rounds into his head and chest. Within hours, one of the most powerful drug traffickers in Colombian history was pronounced dead. But to understand what happened, we need to go back a bit because the real story started long before that final shot. 1951, Herrera was born in Palmyra, and of course, he didn't start off as a drug lord. In high school, he studied technical maintenance. Shortly after, he moved to the U.S., where he worked as a jeweler and a precious metals broker. But this life wouldn't last long. By the late 70s, Herrera had been arrested twice in New York on cocaine distribution charges, and by the early 80s, he made a name for himself in the world of drug trafficking. Soon, his connections and calm demeanor caught the attention of the Cali cartel, a rising power that would soon rival the infamous Medellin cartel. 1983, Herrera officially joins their ranks. He opens new trafficking routes throughout Mexico, running one of the cartel's most advanced money laundering networks, and eventually controlling large territories in Colombia. His operation brought in raw cocaine base from Peru and Bolivia, which was then processed and hid in labs deep in the Colombian jungle. To protect those labs, Herrera hired armed rebel groups like FARC and M19, who were known for controlling remote areas and fighting against the government. And despite his influence, Herrera kept a surprisingly low profile. Unlike other kingpins, he didn't give interviews nor have involvement in politics. And no flashy headlines here. He quietly enjoyed his power, cash, and control. But keeping quiet didn't keep him safe for long. 1990, a soccer field erupted in gunfire. 20 gunmen, dressed as soldiers, opened fire on a crowd where Herrera was sitting. 18 people died that day, but Herrera wasn't one of them. A year later, another attack takes place, this time at a summer resort, and again 17 are killed, 13 others wounded, but Herrera walks away untouched. These attacks were not random. A lot of people believe they were payback from Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel, as part of a brutal chapter in this ongoing war between Colombia's 2 biggest drug empires. But Herrera didn't strike back himself. He kept his hands clean and let the Rodriguez brothers, his partners in the Cali cartel, handle the bloodshed. Still, rumors spread. Some said Herrera was the main financial backer of Los Pepes, the group responsible for leaking intel on Escobar to law enforcement. Others believed he helped fund political campaigns, and through it all, he stayed silent, but not for long. 1996, while most cartel leaders were still hiding or running, Herrera does something unexpected. He turns himself into Colombian authorities. Now, some say he knew the endgame was near. Others believed he cut a deal behind the scenes. Whatever the reason, he ended up being the last of the Cali cartel bosses to fall. And what followed only raised more questions. Herrera got a surprisingly light sentence, just under 7 years. It was later extended to 14. But even then, it felt like a slap on the wrist for someone who helped run a global drug empire, right? The US wasn't pleased, hoping to try him in American courts. But Colombian law wouldn't allow it at the time. Once inside prison, Herrera changed. Or at least that's how it looked. He started keeping to himself, organized soccer tournaments, enrolled in business classes, and in a move that shocked many, he turned in his half-brother on drug charges, reportedly to shave time off his sentence. But that wasn't all. Whispers started to spread. Herrera had been quietly cooperating with the DEA, and there were rumors that he'd provided intel about rival cartels, specifically the Norte del Valle group. If true, that would explain the sentence reduction. It would also put a giant target on his back, and well, it would absolutely explain why someone wanted him dead. On November 6, 1998, the man who walked into Palmyra prison that day wasn't just an assassin. This is Rafael Angel Uribe Serna, a former advisor to Herrera. Now, he'd known him for years, and they were pretty close. Some reports say that he was drunk, but others say that someone sent him. After Uribe hugged Herrera, he pulls out his weapon and fires 7 times, boom, right in the head and chest. It's quick, clinical, and most importantly, execution style. Inmates tackled the shooter before guards even moved. Now the real question wasn't who pulled the trigger, but why? Some say Uribe did act on his own, but others thought someone ordered a hit and maybe threatened Uribe's family when he failed to carry it out. The most likely explanation was that cartels wanted him gone, because he snitched. And that theory starts to make a lot more sense when you realize that Uribe, the guy who pulled the trigger, had close family ties to the Norte del Valle cartel, the very same cartel Herrera was rumored to have given up to the DEA. But one thing's clear, snitch or not, the moment Herrera stopped being useful or started becoming a liability, his fate was sealed. And no matter how powerful he'd once been, even a max security prison couldn't protect him.
Now, he is not an innocent victim in this story. Murshid long ago admitted he did some bad things. But the severity of his punishment has baffled most observers. Who did he make so angry that they locked him up and tossed away the key?
1987. Police kick down the door of a rundown house in East Detroit. Inside, they find a boy and 17 pounds of cocaine. This boy wasn't even 18 yet the media jumps on it. They plaster his face across every screen and front page in the city, calling him a new drug kingpin, a cartel leader, and even a monster. They called him White Boy Rick. But there was one huge detail they left out. He'd been working for the FBI since he was 14. Yeah, Richard Worship Jr. grows up in one of the toughest neighborhoods in Detroit, surrounded by gangs, guns, and crack houses. His dad was a hustler, selling guns out of the house and chasing his next scheme. The FBI shows up at his home in 1984 looking for dirt on local drug lords. They brought a stack of photos to Worship Sr., hoping that he could identify a few faces. He couldn't, but his 14-year-old son could name every single one.
They showed me some pictures and asked me who this person was, who that person was. I basically identified them, and they said they would be in touch.
You see, Rick wasn't a gangster. Not yet, and he had never touched cocaine in his life, but he had started breaking into homes for some cash. Now, he wasn't deep in the game, just sharp and streetwise, aware of what went around him in his community. Now, the FBI saw potential, and Worship Sr. saw a payday, so he agreed. And Rick, well, he saw it as an adventure. He later said,
"What kid doesn't want to be an undercover cop when he's 14, 15 years old?"
And that's how Richard Worship Jr. becomes the youngest FBI informant in history. The feds didn't just listen to what he knew, they also trained him. They gave him cash to buy cocaine so they could build cases. And they taught him how to blend in, talk the talk, and make the right moves on the street. And Rick was good. Like too good, actually. He manages to infiltrate the Curry gang, one of the most feared drug crews in the city. He builds trust, gathers intel, and passes it all back to the FBI. And, well, officially his tips were filed under his father's name, just one of the many ways the agency would cover its tracks. But in reality, at 15, Rick wasn't just pretending to be a drug dealer. Now he's doing it, because that's what the FBI taught him to do. And then Rick stumbles onto something bigger. A kid from the community was shot by the Curry gang, and the police didn't lift a finger. That's when Rick realized the truth. Some of the gang had protection from the inside, and he finds out that the head of homicide, Inspector Gil Hill, had been bribed $10,000 to make the case disappear. And it wasn't just the police. Detroit's mayor, Coleman Young, was connected to the Currys too. Johnny Curry, the gang's boss, was dating the mayor's niece. Go figure. Rick gave the FBI everything. His tips exposed one of the biggest police corruption scandals in Detroit's history. But then something unexpected happened. The FBI bailed. One agent later admitted,
"Washington didn't want another Marion Barry,"
referring to the DC mayor caught smoking crack. So simply, the last thing they wanted was another messy political scandal, and they just pulled back like nothing happened and left Rick to fend for himself. By 16, Rick has no backup, no money, and no protection. And while he didn't know it yet, there was a price on his head. A hitman named Nate Boone Kraft would later confess that Inspector Gil Hill offered him $125,000 to kill Rick. Kraft said,
"I was told to kill White Boy Rick. He said just make sure the boy's dead."
Rick had already taken a bullet to the gut from a Curry associate once, and he's pretty paranoid, scared, and also desperate. After all, he's just a boy, and the only thing he really knows how to do is what the FBI taught him, so he started selling cocaine. For real this time. He hits the streets in gold chains, mink coats, and diamond Rolexes. He drives a white Jeep with the snowman on the back. He's 17, couldn't even grow a real mustache yet, but he's looking the part, and people bought it. And the thing is, with his expertise, he wasn't just dealing, he was taking over. He soon moves into the Curry's old turf. Even started dating Kathy Volson, the mayor's niece. Yeah, the same one who was with Johnny Curry. People in Detroit started whispering that white boy Rick was now running the show. One rival leader said,
He rose all the way up through the ranks. He did it just as big as me, the Curry brothers, Maserati Rick, whoever you want to name.
An FBI agent later said,
We brought him into the drug world, and what happened? He became a drug dealer, and we're surprised by that.
And through it all, Rick was still just a kid, and yet the system was about to crush him.
I was led down this path by law enforcement. I think about every day if I would have walked away. I was a kid. I was stupid.
So police raided Rick's home and found the 17 pounds of coke, and just like that, the headlines blow up. The photo they used showed Rick at the top of a drug empire, with every major name under him. It wasn't really true, but it didn't matter. The judge called him worse than a mass murderer. And if you wonder about what the FBI did, nothing. These guys refused to testify and refused to admit that he'd ever worked for them.
Everybody told me I had nothing to worry about, that I cooperated, that, no one would oppose my release. And then all at once, all had something bad to say about me.
And so, just shy of 18, Rick Wersha Jr. was sentenced to life in prison under Michigan's 650 lifer law, a harsh statute passed in 1973 that mandated life without parole for anyone caught with more than 650 grams of coke or heroin. Years later, that law was overturned. But Rick was still behind bars. Murderers came and went, and corrupt cops walked free. But Rick, man, he stayed locked up for 3 decades. In 2014, a freelance writer named Evan Hughes started digging into this case. He confirmed what Rick had always claimed. The FBI had used him and then hung him out to dry. The story exploded. HBO makes a documentary. Hollywood makes a movie. And for the first time, the public finally hears the real story behind white boy Rick. July 14th, 2017. He's finally granted parole. He just turned 48. Rick said at the hearing,
I've lost 30 years of my life. All I can give you is my word. I'll never commit another crime.
So our question is really what happens to cartel snitches in prison. And in Rick's case, sometimes they rot, not because they're dangerous, but because they got used and then forgotten.
The criminal turned FBI informant who was captured after 16 years on the run was found dead this morning in a federal prison in West Virginia. He was 89 years old.
October 30th, 2018. James Whitey Bulger had just arrived at USP Hazleton. He didn't even make it through his first day because he was targeted the moment he walked in and beaten to death. His killers had stuffed a padlock into a sock and used it to crush his face. They nearly ripped his eyes out of his head and tried to cut off his tongue. For one of Boston's most feared crime bosses, that was pretty brutal, but maybe not a surprising one. Because for years, Whitey over here had walked a dangerous tightrope. He would rule the streets as a boss of the Winter Hill Gang, while secretly feeding information to the feds. And even though he always denied being a snitch, everyone else seemed to agree on one thing. He played both sides. 1929. Bulger's born in South Boston, Southie as locals call it. By 13, he's already been arrested for delinquency. By 26, he's pulling armed bank robberies and serving time in Alcatraz. When he gets out, Bulger climbs the rank of the Boston mob world fast. And by the late 70s, he's taken over the Winter Hill Gang. Under his leadership, the gang dominates in drug trafficking, extortion, loan sharking, whatever. But there's a reason law enforcement can never touch him, and this is where it gets wild. While Bulger was building a criminal empire, his childhood friend, John Connolly, was climbing the FBI ladder. In 1975, Agent Connolly makes him an offer. Become an informant, feed us intel on the Italian mafia, and we'll protect you. And this wasn't just a handshake deal. This was FBI policy at the time. They wanted to bring down the Italian mob. And to do that, they're willing to look the other way on a few other crimes. So, Bulger gives them what they wanted. In return, Connolly and the other agents shielded them from investigations, tipped them off about upcoming raids, and even helped him take out his enemies. When one of Bulger's own men tried to flip and go to the FBI, Connolly leaked it, and Bulger had that guy killed. The nerve. But eventually it all caught up with him. By the early 90s, the DEA was preparing to arrest him. Connolly tipped Bulger off, and he vanishes for the next 16 years. Whitey Bulger becomes one of America's most wanted fugitives, second only to Osama bin Laden. In 2011, he's finally arrested while living quietly in Santa Monica, California, with his girlfriend. Inside their apartment, agents found guns, fake IDs, and a stash of cash worth over $800,000.
This is Whitey Bulger in Federal Prison Orange, escorted under heavy guard on his way to a federal court hearing in Boston.
2013, Bulger finally stands trial for a long list of crimes: racketeering, extortion, and 11 murders. His former allies, including hitman Kevin Weeks and enforcer John Martirano, testified against him. Their stories were brutal. But what seemed to hurt Bulger the most wasn't the murder charges. It was being labeled a snitch. He denied it with everything he had. Bulger said,
"I never cracked. Never, never."
He admitted he was talking to the FBI, but insisted that he was the one using them, not the other way around. Now, the files said otherwise. Eventually, Bulger gets 2 life sentences. He's bounced between several prisons before landing in Hazleton, a notoriously violent facility. And just 12 hours after arrival, he's dead. The prison staff claimed he was medically cleared for transfer, but insiders, including former prison investigators, said it never should have happened. Hazleton was dangerous, and Bulger's reputation as an informant was well known, basically dropping this guy into a lion's den. The prime suspect was Fotios Freddy Gaius, a hitman from the Genovese crime family. Yeah, the Italian mafia, the same people Bulger had snitched on. And Freddy had a known hatred for rats. In the end, Freddy and 2 others are indicted. In 2024, they give him 25 years for killing Bulger. Now, some say Bulger's death was justice served. Others believe it's a system failure, an old man sent to his death by mistake or design. Either way, one thing's clear. Whitey Bulger spent his life walking the line between gangster and government informant, and in the end, that line caught up with him. April 7th, 2009, the gates of a federal penitentiary in West Texas rolled open, and Jose Manuel Garza Rendon, once a lieutenant in the notorious Gulf Cartel, was about to walk free. But freedom, for a man like him, was a loaded word. For nearly 8 years, Garza had been locked away behind American bars after doing something that could get him killed in a heartbeat. He snitched. He'd handed the U.S. government a front row seat to one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels, and now his time was up. The U.S. had no comment on where he was headed next, but Mike Vigil, a former DEA agent, said simply,
"Unless he does a good job of staying on the run or going to an area where nobody knows him, they'll kill him."
But how did a man like that get to this point? Jose Manuel Garza Rendon, nicknamed La Brocha, meaning the brush, grew up in Matamoros, Mexico, and dropped out after 6th grade. He bounces between the U.S. and Mexico, landing his first drug conviction in 1979 in the U.S. By the mid-'80s, he's joined Mexico's federal judicial police, and by the late 80s, he's quietly working with the Gulf Cartel. Now, he's not just moving around drugs, he's protecting the big bosses. Eventually, he becomes a bodyguard and a right-hand man to Ociel Cardenas Guillen, the cartel's top dog at the time. But then 1999 marked a turning point, and not a good one. That year, Garza and a few other cartel members, including Cardenas, pulled guns on 2 federal agents and an informant in broad daylight in Matamoros. The agents were gathering intel. They left alive, but the message was clear. The cartel wasn't afraid to threaten the U.S. government directly. What followed, as you can imagine, was a full-scale manhunt. The U.S. indicted Garza for drug trafficking and assault, and Mexico issued its own warrant. Organized crime, attempted murder, money laundering, even possession of military-grade weapons. And so suddenly, Garza had heat from both sides of the border, and things were closing in. Then, on June 5th, 2001, in a move no one expected, Garza turns himself in. He crossed the Far Reynosa International Bridge and gave himself up to U.S. agents. Garza doesn't wait for a shootout nor a chase. This guy already realized his enemies were everywhere, and that maybe prison was safer than the street. He said he wasn't involved with cartels, and that he worked a normal job in Mexico. But of course, none of the feds are buying this, and soon enough he pleads guilty to drug trafficking, specifically conspiring to move nearly a ton of marijuana into the U.S. So from that point on, things get a little less clear-cut. No one knows exactly what Garza told the U.S. government, but behind closed doors, DEA and FBI called his intel substantial, was extradited just a few years later. Was that connected? Maybe, maybe not. But Garza had clearly given something useful, and in return, the U.S. dropped some of his charges. He gets a reduced sentence, serves his time quietly, and keeps a low profile until 2009, when the gate of that prison opened up. And even after he'd given crucial information to the U.S. government, he's still immediately picked up by ICE and deported to Mexico after his release. And And once there, he finds himself right in the hands of federal agents who'd been waiting for him. They arrest him yet again, this time on charges from 2000. He's sent to prison in Mexico City, facing a whole new legal battle. What happens to him behind the bars of that Mexican prison remains unclear, but as agent Mike Vigil once put it,
just like the Italian mafia, the cartels don't forget.
These two men are federal drug agents. The third man is Baton Rouge pilot and soldier of fortune, Barry Seal,
very careful
described by some law enforcement officials as one of the biggest arms and drug smugglers in the country.
February 19th, 1986. It was just after dark in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, when gunfire erupted outside a quiet Salvation Army halfway house. Moments later, a man lay dead beside his car, shot by 3 Colombian hitmen with machine guns. This was Barry Seal, and this wasn't a random guy on the street, but the man who had helped take down Pablo Escobar. Barry was a pilot, and not just any pilot. He was one of the youngest boys ever hired by Trans World Airlines, and he loved flying, loved that rush of being thousands of feet in the air. But after a while, that kind of adrenaline just wasn't enough for him. He wanted more.
And the exciting thing in life to me is to get into a life-threatening situation. Now that's excitement.
By the late 1970s, he'd traded in commercial flights for something a little riskier, smuggling. First marijuana, then cocaine, and eventually he's flying directly for the Medellin cartel. They trusted him to move thousands of kilos into the U.S., sometimes earning $1.5 million per flight. To them, he was a great asset, but to the DEA, he's becoming something even more valuable. They just had to catch him red-handed.
I was associated with in the entire operation, made it well known that we're going to get Barry Seal, whatever it costs.
1984, Seal gets busted with over 400 pounds of Escobar's cocaine. It should have meant the end, earning him decades behind bars. But instead, it's the beginning of a very dangerous deal. So he strikes this deal with the DEA and CIA. They hand him a plane wired up with hidden cameras and give him one mission: infiltrate the cartel.
The camera was mounted here on this bulkhead by the CIA. They had a remote control camera enclosed in an electronics box.
And somehow he pulled it off. He flies down to Nicaragua and comes back with photographic proof. Images showing cocaine being loaded onto his plane, and Pablo Escobar standing right there. But that's where things get a whole lot more dangerous. The Washington Times gets their hands on those photos and publishes them. And if that's not bad enough, they would publish Seal's name. And just like that, his cover's blown. And the cartel knew exactly who'd betrayed him. From that moment on, he's a dead man walking. The DEA advises him to enter witness protection, but he refuses. Maybe he thought he could handle it, or maybe he just didn't want to disappear. And so he ended up going to trial. But because of his cooperation, the court gives him a light sentence. Just 6 months at a Salvation Army halfway house in Baton Rouge, which wasn't exactly the safest places for the most wanted informant in the country. The facility was open, minimal security with no guards and no fences. Just a place meant for nonviolent offenders to serve time in a structured environment. And in Barry's case, it was a sitting target, because Barry had a strict schedule. Every night at a specific time, he had to check in at the same place, and so the cartel didn't really have to look very hard to find him. On the night of February 19th, 1986, Seal's pulling into the parking lot in his white Cadillac. That's when 3 Colombian hitmen sent by the Medellin cartel ambush him. They open fire with automatic weapons, killing him instantly in a hail of bullets. And just like that, the man who once flew tons of cocaine across international borders, who took down Pablo Escobar with a camera, and who thought he could outfly everyone, even death, was gone.
The first thing he says to us is, "Well played, gentlemen. Well played." And he goes, "Obviously, if you're looking at me, you're looking at much bigger things."
September 26, 2012, a man steps off a plane in Monrovia, Liberia. Now, he thought he was meeting with a Colombian drug cartel to seal a new meth deal. Naturally, he's calm, confident, and used to flying under the radar for years. But within 24 hours, he's in handcuffs and on a flight to the U.S. He had no idea that the arrest would mark the end of his empire and the beginning of one of the most shocking cooperation deals in DEA history. This man is Paul Laroo. He's a former computer programmer, a self-taught genius, a criminal mastermind, and eventually a snitch. Born and raised in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, on Christmas Eve in 1972, he's adopted and raised in a mining town. By his teens, He's already learning to code, and in his early 20s, he's working as a developer in the UK and Australia. In 1999, he built E4M, a powerful encryption tool that some say inspired TrueCrypt. Laroo denied it, but no one really knows for sure. And then in 2004, he shifted gears. He sets up RX Limited, a network of online pharmacies that sold prescription meds, often without real doctor visits. From the outside, it looked like a shady side business, but behind the scenes, it was a global machine with call centers in Manila and Tel Aviv, American doctors writing scripts for strangers, and warehouses shipping pills by the thousands. And when regulations tightened, Laroo adapted. He created his own domain registry to stay ahead of spam filters, and at one point, half the rogue pharmacies online were traced back to his system. And if you're thinking that's insane, well, it's only just the beginning. Once the money started flowing, Laroo went darker, and we mean much darker.
I need my friend everything you want. Even shit the one, bro.
By 2007, he's running an international criminal empire. Not just pills. We're talking arms deals, gold smuggling, illegal logging, meth labs, and hitmen. His reach went across Hong Kong, Colombia, Africa, Brazil, and Southeast Asia. He ran everything from his mansion in Manila, Philippines, hiding behind tall gates and private guards. He lived like a ghost, used fake passports, and some say even planned to fake his own death at some point. Oh, and if you crossed him, you disappeared. Permanently. Employees that got greedy or sloppy were tortured, shot, dumped at sea, or found in fields with bullets under each eye. In 2012, the DEA finally had enough. They set up an elaborate sting operation. Agents pose as Colombian traffickers offering a meth deal. They baited Laroo into traveling to Liberia, a country where they could grab him without the hassle of extradition laws. It worked. The moment Laroo touched down in Monrovia, he was arrested, and he didn't even bide his time. On the flight back to the US, he cut a deal. He agrees to cooperate with the DEA in exchange for a lighter sentence and immunity for any crimes he confesses to. He ends up admitting to 7 murders. Then from 2012 to 2020, Laroo basically vanishes. His arrest is kept secret, and his name doesn't appear in court records. On paper, he doesn't exist. In reality, he's helping the Fed set up his own people. He's running his empire through DEA wires and leading former associates straight into traps. More than a dozen arrests would follow. Cartel members, hitmen, arms dealers, all taken down by the guy they once worked for. A lot of people say he did it to save his skin, yet others think that he just enjoyed the power, playing puppet master from behind a cell door. So what happens to a cartel snitch like Laroo? You'd expect someone like him to be found dead in a cell, right? But no. In 2020, Laroo was finally officially sentenced to 25 years in prison. Judge Ronnie Abrams called him a real-life James Bond villain, but even she admitted that his cooperation saved lives. And probably his own. Laroo didn't get witness protection nor even a new identity. But he also didn't end up like most snitches, with a target on his back or dead. All he got was a prison cell, a stack of sealed court files, and a long, quiet wait for what comes next. However, once he's released, Laroo's expected to be deported to the Philippines to face charges for several murders, and for a 2009 arms shipment the government intercepted. And maybe that's where his luck will finally run out.